Masdevallia orchids are a cool to intermediate growing orchid. In this video we look at how to grow, repot and divide Masdevallia orchids.
Okay, so we'll look at Masdevallias this morning, which are a beautiful group of plants that come from South America, most notably from the Machu Picchu region, where the parents of this plant grew. So they grow cool because they come from high altitude, and so we have to look after them in a particularly careful way. So our conditions are going to be shady for the summer, quite heavy shade, and in the winter, brighter light. They have to have high humidity and they have to have good air movement. They don't have bulbs, as you can see here, just leaves, no pseudobulbs as we would expect in our cymbidiums. So this means that they don't have very many reserves of storage for energy and water, and so you have to be careful with them that they keep a very good root system. So a little plant like this is just about filling its pot and it's ready to move up to the next size. So we just pop him out of the pot. I would have watered it first to make sure it has plenty of moisture. You can see this was growing in sphagnum moss, which we'll talk about potting in later. So we're going to put it into bark. The mixture we have here is 9 to 12 mil orchiata bark with super coarse perlite, about 20% of super coarse perlite. That makes a very good mix. So when we put them into bark and they've previously been in moss, we do strip out the moss. And we usually throw it away because old moss is not of any value for repotting in, but it's pretty good to put on the garden, put in with the compost. So we strip it out and you can see here all the new little live root tips. So this is the perfect time to pot in the spring before it gets too hot, and we'll get these new little roots into fresh mix. Just any little dead bits of roots, just pick them out. We'll leave that little bit of moss there. So we got a perfect little plant with 15-20 leaves that will go into a bigger pot and then remain there for a couple of years until we divide it, and we'll look at dividing them later. So put a little bit of mix into the pot, and then we use this slow release Osmocote, which is 8 to 9 months, just what you can pick up in 3 fingers. Sprinkle in the bottom there, then hold the plant left hand. We're being careful to keep the plant above the potting mix surface. So we hold it just a fraction below the pot rim and we tap in some bark. Just keep tapping it down so that the bark mix goes in between the roots thoroughly, and keep adjusting the height as you go. With a plant that grows like this does all around the pot, we centralize it. If you have a plant with a bulb and a lead, you always keep the lead to the front, but with this we just centralize it and we keep just adjusting our height as we go. You start with it perhaps a little low and just lift it as you keep putting the bark in, and firm it in well. The last thing you want to do is have your plant loose in the pot. So make sure you finger it down nice and tight. We should aim to have the surface of the bark potting mix just fractionally below the rim of the pot, so we have a little water well. And there we go. That's got 2 years growth in it, and theoretically you should be able to hold it by the leaves and let it go. That works with small pots, not with big ones. Okay, then pop the label back in the pot, and that's that done. Then back in the growing area, water it in, and the aftercare is important with these. You don't keep it too wet for the first 2 to 3 weeks. So let those roots search for moisture, so just keep it a little bit damp. Shall we move on to one potting in moss? Okay, so a plant, Masdevallias will grow into these big specimen plants that really overgrow the pot. I always say under pot plants because really you can see if the mix stays in good condition, the plant will just keep growing. When you're potting a plant that has flower spikes on, good idea to take them off. It's that time of the year, their flowers are virtually finished. And we can make this into several divisions. You can see here we have pieces all hanging over the edge with new roots coming away. So we just pull him out of the pot and you can see that mix is pretty much gone. And to divide, it's a matter of just putting your fingers in and pulling apart, and it will come into natural pieces quite easily. We're looking for a division that has maybe 8 to 10 leaves. We might get another one out of there. This is a very nice division here. We'll just take these little pieces off it. Okay, so there we have a very perfect division. Just a few little old leaf bases that we can take out. No dead roots because they were all dead, but we have all new ones coming there. Now we pot this in moss. The moss technique is a little bit different. We still use the bark and perlite in the bottom of the pot, about 1/3 of a pot. We still use a pinch of Osmocote 8 to 9 month high K fertilizer, but then we use the sphagnum moss. So this is fresh sphagnum moss that's been dried and then rehydrated. So my basic method to do this is just to pick up some moss in my fingers and wrap it around the root system of the plant. So you've roughly got the amount of moss that's going to fit in that pot. And then you just push it down into the pot like so. Feel with your fingers where it's a little bit loose and tuck in a little bit extra. Just go around. It shouldn't be too loose, shouldn't be too tight. And pull off the loose edges. And there we have it. If you can see here, I've kept the growths above the level of the moss, and you can see all the new roots ready to go into it, just like that. See the new roots going down here? We have 8 or so leaves, and that will stay in that pot for up to 2 years. These plants need potting fairly regularly to keep growth in them going well. You can also pot in moss by let's take this division, similar size, clean out the dead roots. See these little soft ones here? They're soft, pulpy, they're not good. So you can just pick them out with your fingers. These ones that are hard and brown, they'll grow, okay? They can be white or they can be brown, but if they're hard to the touch, they're good roots. So we can then, I use this 85 ml pot, nicely drained, and again, some of the mix in the bottom, little dribble of fertilizer. So this time we won't bundle it, okay, we just tap it. Make sure you tap it down so these roots get into the bark at the bottom, and then we'll pick up the moss and we'll just put it in little pieces working around the pot. So sometimes people find this is an easier way of doing it because bundling, as we call the other method, requires a little experience to know how much to wrap around, whereas this you can just keep adding moss until it's nice and tight, and all the time making sure you're not burying the plant. It is really bad to bury plants. The new growths start at the base of the plant, and if you bury them down underneath the potting mix, they're not going to grow, and you can kill the plant. Again, when you pot in moss, they definitely shouldn't come out of the pot. With bark, it's a little different, but with moss, they should definitely be firm enough to stay, and if it falls out, you haven't done it tight enough.
So why are we putting the bark in the bottom of the pot?
It's a good spot to put the fertilizer. The sphagnum moss doesn't really like the strong fertilizer of Osmocote, and you certainly never put it on top of the moss. So we found that by putting it in a bit of potting mix around the base, that softens its effect a little bit. The moss will grow into it, and in fact, when you get moss growing, well, this has been potted in moss some time ago, and that's the result of the moss growing. And with those, we would just strip this moss out because it's just getting a bit overgrown. But there you can see the new growth coming up through the new soft green moss. And of course this stuff you can put back and reuse. It's perfectly new, fresh moss. And there we have it. You can see all the little roots in there, can you? So the other thing with moss is it's a wonderful material because you can tell when it needs watering. When the surface is dark green, it doesn't need watering. When it goes white, it does need watering. So that makes it very easy on the eye just to tell that plant needs the water because it's just dried off. This one, moist well enough, don't water. We find that moss can be overwatered, so you need to watch your watering a little bit, that it doesn't drain as freely as bark does, but it is completely full of air. The thing with moss is a natural material full of air. So when you water, all the air spaces are filled up, and then it gradually releases it to the plant and becomes full of air again, which is the air exchange you want. Remember, all these plants are epiphytes, we call fine-rooted epiphytes. They grow on the branches of trees as a rule, and most of the time they're growing in association with mosses or lichens. So by potting them in moss, you're putting them in a material that they do really enjoy growing in. Probably the downside of moss is it's more expensive to buy than bark. It requires a little bit of technique to pot in, but overall I think it's a very good material. And traditionally in orchids, if you have a plant that's not doing well, the recommendation is put it in sphagnum moss. And yeah, I've found that's true over the years. They will grow away quite happily. So if they're growing well in sphagnum moss when they're sick, probably how much better will they do growing in sphagnum moss when they're a strong, healthy plant. So that's a little look at the Masdevallias. I've mentioned this fertilizer a couple of times. It is an osmocote. It's not the osmocote that you usually find for sale in the nurseries. This is 8 to 9 months, low nitrogen, high K. And that is very important. You must not use osmocotes that are fast release, that are used for growing tomatoes and lettuce and stuff. You've got to use the slow release. 8 to 9 months in practice means that it will last a year, because it works with temperature as a rule, and during the winter when it's cold it's not releasing. So yeah, it's a very practical fertilizer. It means you don't have to mix, you don't have to remember to do your feeding. It's in the pot. When it's warm, when you water, it releases some fertilizer. The only thing that we do in addition to this is use some power feed, maybe 2 or 3 times during the colder months. Because this is not releasing at all during the colder months, the plants can get a little bit hungry, the ones that are in growth. So we give them a little bit of organic feed during the winter time to counteract that. And it gives us extremely good results. Growing Masdevallias, because they require a fair bit of moisture, they will grow ferns very commonly in the pot, as you can see here. Now these little ferns, although they may look very attractive, do fill the pot up with a very fibrous root system that absorbs a lot of water and can starve the plant quite easily. So as a general rule, I remove these ferns as quickly as they grow. These have grown up a bit large, but even though they look pretty in the pot, it is certainly a good idea to get rid of them. As I say, they do make this very strong fibrous root system that completely fills the pot with roots and absorbs all the water that should be going to the plant. So much as they look nice, ferns out.
If you'd like to take a look at some of the wonderful Masdevallia orchids that are available, follow the link. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for regular updates on all aspects of gardening. And as always, good luck with your gardening.